And these questions are going to be, you're going to be able to know exactly where I'm going, so I'm just going to be blunt. You didn't see any evidence in the intelligence of espionage or in support of espionage. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You didn't see any evidence in the intelligence of sabotage or anything in support of sabotage?
That's correct.
You didn't see anything in the evidence, any evidence in the intelligence of any form of foreign influenced activities within or relating to Canada that involved the threat to any person?
I saw media accounts, yes. I saw no information collected or intelligence produced in that regard, no. To support that, no.
Now, for my following question, when I say serious violence against a person, you'll understand I mean violence that would result in serious personal injury, okay? You didn't see any evidence in the intelligence of activities within or relating to Canada directed toward or in support of the threat of a use of acts of serious violence against persons for the purpose of achieving a political, religious, or ideological objective within Canada or a foreign state?
So yes, I know where you're going, and I want to be fair to my colleagues in planning. I saw online rhetoric. I saw information on social media. I saw assertions of that type of activity. Information. I'm aware of no intelligence that was produced that would support concern in that regard.
Thank you.
I'd like to go down to page 2 of this report and to the second last bullet. And I just ask you about fundraising. It indicates that at this point, on the 25th, the GoFundMe is at $4.4 million, which is an increase of almost $1 million in the last 24 hours. Was this something that POIB was keeping an eye on and concerned about?
We were definitely keeping an eye on it, and here's why. For any type of event of this nature, no matter what the motivation is, social media has altered the way we collect information and the meaning that we derive from it. We can always significantly discount some of the numbers that like it or say they'll be there. What we noticed in this event and in some other previous events related to these grievances was that there was much more meaning in the support. And the reason that the finances are so important is money is a powerful motivator, and this was growing rapidly. And I can say it was growing at a rate that for us was unprecedented. And so that added impact to our assessment that this would be significant.
And if you can just help me understand, was it concern about what the money would be used for, or is it that the money coming in is a reflection that this is truly there's some widespread support for it, and that's concerning, or is it both?
I think it's both. We definitely felt there was widespread support. I mean, I realized that the narrative, going back to the spring of 2021, the narrative was that people who felt a certain way were a small number of people, were et cetera, the fringe, so to speak. This was difficult for us to deal with in policing in Ontario, specifically because there was a large degree of support, and there were a number of instances. So it spoke to that support.
I don't think, well, this is February 11th, so you would not have been aware of it yet. But in addition, if there was at one point some arrests made in Coutts, Alberta, which you asked about.
Yes.
And that was also informing what was going on in Ottawa?
Yep. So to be fair on that, when the arrests occurred, we took multiple steps to acquire the information, specifically, as I discussed with the former council, to see what is the impact, what is the connection, et cetera. We determined, we got the information from the RCMP. I spoke with the Assistant Commissioner, I believe Assistant Commissioner or Deputy Commissioner Mark Flynn, and then with the person leading the investigation, and we determined that there was very little connection to Ottawa, and that therefore our assessment was there would be very little impact, and there was not.
When you say you found no credible intelligence of threats, Were you involved in the investigations into particular threats that were made to various politicians and other public figures in Ottawa, or is that something that the OPS dealt with?
Primarily, that would be activity that that the OPS engaged in.
Okay.
And also, I'm talking about, threats generally that would be premised in intelligence. Like, I'll give you an example. On February 2nd at 18:30 hours, we're going to breach security to the West Wing of Parliament, et cetera. And I have been engaged in protests before where things like that have happened, and we could find no credible intelligence of threats.
Those kinds of threats. So you're not talking about a threat that may be made against a particular individual, for example?
But we never, that's true, but we never had intelligence of that, threats of those. And I mean, I've reviewed the arrests and the charges and stuff to try and ascertain how accurate we were. And there was, I would say, the lack of violent crime was shocking. The lack, I mean, even in the arrests and charges, considering the whole thing in totality, I think there were 10 charges for violent crime, 6 of which were against police officers.
You're sort of explaining why you're writing this email, that you have a somewhat unique view into the intelligence that was gathered leading up to these events. And in the middle of the paragraph that begins further, you say, by way of example, I see a marked increase in the conversation of extremists participating in these events and Canadians with extreme ideologies leading the charge. Although there are exceptions, I have not seen evidence of this. In fact, Hendon received and reported very little of this activity. It was not in evidence at the Ambassador Bridge, nor events related to the Blue Water Bridge. Further, the events in Toronto did not illustrate this. By way of example, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service had very little to report on and noted that their targets were not engaged. INSET, and sorry, can you just tell us what INSET is?
Yeah, INSET is a federal joint force operation led by the RCMP. It stands for Integrated National Security Enforcement Team, and they have the responsibility to engage in investigations that meet the threshold of Section 83 of the Criminal Code.
Okay, and so INSET reported that the activity did not meet their threshold in national security. So I do not know where the political figures are acquiring information or intelligence on the extent of extremist involvement. So here, you're expressing the concern that this narrative around extremism is not consistent with the intelligence that you gathered, collected, reviewed over the course of the weeks leading up to these events.
That's correct.
Okay.
So as of January 13th, was POIB of the view that there was going to be a mass convoy to Ottawa?
Yes.
And what were the sources of this early knowledge of the convoy?
So we had multiple investigative techniques that we were employing. So I could run through them. One was open source collection. And I want to stress that's information. Open source, so I put a lesser value on that at the origin point. Also, we had covert operations ongoing, which you won't see as related in the documentation before you because of the sensitivities. We engaged in a large degree of analysis and at times surveillance operations, and that's primary and source recruitment for covert operations. That information, all of which is information, is collected, and then we go through the collation and analysis process, and then we provide our analysis, which I refer to as intelligence, and that is how we came to the conclusions and assessments that we did.
And that one is dated Thursday, January 20th. So at this point, Superintendent, the reports are being published just on a weekly basis. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And if you see the information in the key information box there, number 1, the Freedom Convoy 2022 and Operation Bear Hug will almost certainly disrupt the movement of vehicular traffic and goods on Canadian highways and possibly at ports of entry along the border with the United States. And then point 2, some participants in these convoys may attempt to disrupt the business of government at both the provincial and federal level by blocking access to government, legislatures, and parliament. Does that accurately summarize the risk as POIB understood it?
Yes, it does, and if I can just add a comment, as a result of the information we became aware of in early January, as reflected in the first report you showed to me, we stepped up our assignments, our taskings, and our information collection in order to produce more intelligence on what we felt was a burgeoning priority. Also, in terms of being armed, I want to be clear on this. We had we produced no intelligence to indicate that these individuals would be armed. And there has been a lot of hyperbole about that. That was something we wish to, when people think about what happened on January 6th of 2020, that is presence of mind, but we produced no intelligence to indicate that that would be the case.